areas, especially the good quality cropland, strengthening.
I'm Mark Dorenkamp with Managing for Profit on Brownfield.
Divine Intervention is online at yourfortdodge.com, on Twitter at jmike1400.
That's right. Here we are. We want to welcome Joe Coleman to the program, and thank you for your patience on that, Joe. We'll try to make sure that never happens again when you have to wait on the phone like that. So,
not a problem, Mike. I'm happy to be here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir. Of course, Joe Coleman is a deacon in the Catholic Church and a devout Catholic. He's also an attorney and a number of other things that I don't even know about, I'm sure. So we are always glad to have Joe on the air with us to bring his perspective to the day's events. I tried to talk a little bit earlier about the Christian perspective on, well, being an American and what we saw on Wednesday. And all of the discussion around, I was grossed out to see all those people breaking up the Capitol building, for God's sake. But I'm interested in the Christian perspective on this. How does a Christian react to something this gross?
Well, I'm sure there are multiple reactions of people, many times dependent on their political perspective. But the fact of the matter is, violence against our neighbor is abhorred. And we try and do things in both a Christian manner and in a civilized manner. So, it just depends on the circumstance. We also know that from St. Thomas Aquinas and from a variety of other individuals, for example, that civil disobedience is allowed and sometimes is called for. But civil disobedience is generally to be peaceful. We also know that there's the just war principle, where the actual taking of life and the defending of liberty is acknowledged as being something that is permissible. So, as with most things in life, Mike, it depends on what's going on and what the circumstances are and how people act in a given set of circumstances.
Well, I've been listening to what the Democrats and Republicans have been saying, and what a surprise, they're a bunch of political hacks who just want to attack the other side. So I'd like to set them aside for a while, especially Nancy Pelosi, who gave me a headache last night while I was watching her on 60 Minutes. She didn't say anything about the country. It was just Trump, and Trump is bad. And I mean, is that the best we can expect from the leaders of the country? I guess it is right now at this particular period in history. But you mentioned the just war concept. That drives the evangelical Lutherans, it drives them crazy. They don't believe that there is such a thing as a just war concept. And they will point to the Catholics as being in error of the just war concept. And I would point back, how then would we have conquered stark evil? And of course, the easiest example of stark evil is Hitler or somebody like that. I mean, he could not be allowed to continue the slaughter of Jews and other minorities in Europe. He could not be allowed to conquer Europe. His plan was to conquer the world with his evil ideology. And the only solution, the only sensible reaction, was to take up arms against such an enemy.
That's very true. And I understand with most, all of this stuff is a microcosmic reaction to the macrocosm of good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Every situation that you and I confront in our lives, Mike, every single situation we confront, we can either confront in the light or in the darkness. We can either confront it with good or we can confront it with evil. Everything we do. So, yeah, the Lord kind of answered this question for us when he was attempting to be trapped at the time when they handed him the Roman coin. And he answered it very, very well. Whose countenance is that? Whose figure is that on that coin? Well, of course, they responded, it's Caesar's. And the Lord looks at him. This is simple. Render unto Caesar that which is his. Render unto the Lord that which is God's. So when we get into that realm of, for example, just war, we have a whole lot of Caesar or the civil coming into play in our lives. And we know that many times when confronted with two evils, because we would certainly say that war is an evil, and then we would say that killing in a war is also an evil, or fighting in a war. But when we are confronted with moral dilemma that really only involves the choice between two evils, you and I both know we are obliged to follow the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of an esoteric explanation of it from a philosophical point of view.
Well, that's what we're doing here. We're trying to get to a philosophical point of view, and when I approach these subjects, I always wonder what would Jesus do, as the popular phrase popped up around here a number of years ago. What would Jesus do if this were the case? There are examples of Jesus being angry in the Bible. He threw the money changers out of the temple, that sort of thing. He seems to have accepted the death penalty. He actually accepted his own death for our sins. A lot of people will use it, and as a matter of fact, I have used it in death penalty arguments as an example of Christ justifying the death penalty.
Al, I've as I've said to you many times before, I love your point of view, and I love the point of view of my fellow citizens. I may disagree with the interpretation of that, but that's what makes the world go round. And you and I both in this life, we struggle for answers. We struggle to find the right answer. Last time you and I talked about the Jesuits, and I think I told you this once. I had an old Jesuit teacher that used to say, they say the successful man in business makes the right decision 50% of the time. I'm going to tell you, gentlemen, how to make the right decision every single time.
Wow.
So all of our ears perked up, and we listened, and he said, every time you are confronted with the decision, if you make your decision based on love, you will never make a wrong decision. So let's fast forward to what you were saying relative to Hitler. Let me posit something to you, and you advise me. Assume for purposes of argument that the entire world had said, we are not going to act in any manner but love towards our fellow man. So the Wehrmacht, the SS, all the field marshals said, we're not going to take up arms. We're not going to act contrary with the Jewish population, nor with Eastern Europe, nor with Western Europe. And the Americans had said, we're not going to do this. What would have happened? What do you think would have happened?
Evil would have triumphed.
You think so, huh?
Well, it could be.
Maybe it would have ended. Maybe. There was an interesting book that came out about, oh my gosh, I bet you've read, about 25 years ago, and it was What If, I think was the title. And it was a history book, and it was what if the results had been different? And it was hugely interesting from the point of view that it's Newton's third law of motion in history and in social study. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. So I don't know. It's certainly fun to ponder. The problem is that we get to ponder it in the warmth of a heated home in America where we're free. We don't have to ponder it out on the steppe or the prairie where it's cold and we have no food.
That's also a good thing. That's a very good thing.
This same old Jesuit professor used to say, the Lord was smart. He always made sure people were well fed before he taught them. because he knew and understood that it's very difficult to learn when your stomach's growling.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I've often thought of that in regards to food stamps, for example. I know this. I may be taking this in a weird direction, but for you, but there's always a big discussion about food stamps. And, oh my God, the undeserving are getting food stamps, and there's probably that element out there that are scamming the government. But most food stamp recipients are older people and children. Do we really want to cut their food stamps?
Mike, you know what the best argument for this is when people raise that argument with me, I say, look, let's just find out what the facts are.
Yeah.
So all of you people, all of you folks that feel that welfare for the poorest among us is wrong, I'll tell you what. We'll just take we'll stop taking our welfare, and we'll take the welfare that our government gives to corporations.
There we go.
Which you don't have any problem with. And the interesting thing about that is our welfare would about double.
Yeah, it would. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I've gotten in trouble several times for referring to Iowa as a socialist state with all the federal farm programs, and of course, on Managing for Profit just a few minutes ago, one of the analysts just said that most of the profits this year are going to come, as far as farm profits, are going to come from federal farm programs and the aid that farmers get every year. Now, I know I'm not supposed to mention that because that really, again, drives farmers insane. But that's the facts. That's the facts that, and some of the farmers, by the way, are not living in public housing or on food stamps. They're living pretty well.
And there we go again. Whose ox is being gored, Mike?
Yeah.
Just like that. You know, if somebody asked me, Joe, what are you? My first response to that is, you know, I'm a retired farmer. I was a farm kid. I grew up. I owned farms. I have farms. I'm tied to the land. I appreciate what the farmers do for us. They feed us. Most people don't realize that our farming community is one of the three legs of the milking stool of public defense.
Yes.
The military is one, the farming is one, and our economic community is the other. It's called the triad defense. And we need all three of those legs in order to keep us free.
That's interesting. The triad defense?
Yeah. That our government has said there are three things which we must have. We must have food, we must have defense, and we must have an economic system which promotes development. And the government has a vested interest in providing for the common good, making sure those three things work. Interestingly enough, when I traveled in Russia and the Iron Curtain countries as the fall was happening, the cheapest thing that you could buy there was food. Food was always cheap. There was always bread in the Soviet Union, albeit not a lot, but you know, when they didn't have toasters and they didn't have radios and they didn't have cars, they had bread because the communist regimes understood that you don't survive if you don't feed your people. And we kind of see that a little bit in North Korea, and we see it in China.
Yeah, North Korea apparently is willing to let their people starve, but in China, they have a history of starvation in their country, and regimes are overthrown, royal figures are executed because the people didn't have enough to eat. Bill Horn, who I haven't seen for a long time, regrettably, used to tell me that people who are hungry will do desperate things. But people who see their children go hungry will do anything. And I've always been struck by the absolute truth of that. Certainly, if I was hungry, I'd do desperate things. But I'd do anything before I saw my children, well, he's an adult now, or my grandchildren go hungry. I would do anything to prevent them from being hungry. anything.
Of course. One of the great mentors I had in the law, a name that's familiar to many of your listeners, John Mitchell, who was a federal judge, Attorney General of Iowa, Speaker of the House, and a trial lawyer, used to say that we are 3 days of hot meals away from a revolution at any time in this country.
Yeah, take that away from me, and I'm ready to have a revolution. There's no doubt. There's just absolutely no doubt. We're not North Korea, thank God. All right, Joe Coleman is our guest. We're going to have to go to the news. Joe, please give us a call back right at 4:10.
See you then.
Thank you, sir. All right, yeah, really a decent day here in Fort Dodge. The weather for this time of year is pretty decent. Now, of course, as I say that and I turn to my computer screen where the weather forecast should be, I see it's not there. But we'll hear about the weather here in just a couple of minutes. It's 4 o'clock.
For exciting Panther sports, keep it right here on your home for University of Northern Iowa sports in North Central Iowa. The voice of Fort Dodge, KVFD, Fort Dodge.
Tighter security for the U.S. Capitol. Lisa Brady, Fox News. Nearly a week earlier than planned, the Secret Service will begin carrying out a special security operation for the inauguration, which happens a week from Wednesday. This as the FBI and Homeland Security monitor the risk of more violence and threats of protests at the U.S. Capitol and its state capitals across the country. Thousands more National Guard troops are heading to D.C., and a landmark is now temporarily closed.
The National Park Service says the Washington Monument is off limits today through January 24th due to ongoing threats to disrupt the inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden. Other parts of the National Mall could also be restricted to visitors, and some roads could be closed to protect public safety and park resources if warranted. The Park Service says the threats include the setup and execution of inaugural events, which will occur in several park areas.
Fox's Rachel Sutherland. Meantime, 2 votes targeting President Trump are planned over last week's deadly attack on the Capitol. Fox's Jared Halpern is live on Capitol Hill.
House Democrats will force a vote tomorrow on a resolution urging Vice President Mike Pence and the cabinet to remove President Trump by office by invoking the 25th Amendment. Early Wednesday morning, House Democratic leaders say debate will begin on a single article of impeachment. A group of Democrats introduced an impeachment resolution accusing President Trump of incitement of insurrection, writing the president willfully made statements that encouraged lawless action at the Capitol. If the impeachment resolution clears the House, a Senate trial is unlikely before President-elect Biden takes office next week. Lisa.
Thanks, Jared. Fox News has learned that acting Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf is stepping down, telling DHS employees in a letter he is saddened to take this step. It was his intention to serve until the end of the administration, but he says this action is warranted by recent events, including the, quote, ongoing and meritless court rulings regarding the validity of his authority. America is listening to Fox News.
Progressive Motorcycle presents Road Wisdom from the Motor.
Half man, half motorcycle.
In life, there is no stopping.
Don't stop.
But if you do, make sure no one is behind you.
All clear.
Progressive Motorcycle also presents basic policy starting at $79.